In those days, the crest was in service to Steward Captain Auxilia of the Drift. There are many powers in Heartvale, many factions. When we came to the city, we underestimated the web of plots and intrigue, perhaps because our contract in Lasha had been somewhat straightforward: defeat the encroaching barbarians. In Heartvale, there are no barbarians massing, no open plain to form lines for battle and march straight ahead. No, battles in Heartvale require something more dangerous and more elusive to a group of mercenaries: finesse. The Shades are one such political power within the city. Their name is whispered amongst those in the know, operatives trained in espionage, trickery, and whatever needs to be done for the protection of the city. They certainly sound admirable, and their agents have approached some of our members with information. From what I've been able to discern, they are not our direct enemies, and if their information proves useful, they may in fact be allies, though I do not hold any hope for that. The crest has not survived for so long by ignoring unexpected assistance, but we are always cautious in the face of seeming altruism. There are many powers in Heartvale, many factions. The Shades are but one, and what their aim is I cannot yet guess. Until we put them to the test, we will continue to assume there is a dagger to our throat. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, Benn finally gets to chat with Merrick the Brewer, but only after a vague warning. Find out what happens on episode 5, Sneaking Suspicions. Benn looks across the table at the young woman with the bright red hair as she has just told him that she is a shade, and he looks at her with a measure of disbelief, and he says, "Really, you are a shade? I find that hard to believe. After all, I am unaccustomed to shades simply walking up to someone and introducing themselves." She says, "These are extraordinary times, don't you know? And it's not that I'm introducing myself. I simply need you to understand that I come to you speaking with a certain amount of authority." Benn says, "And what do you have to say to me?" She says, "I've heard that you are asking some questions about merchants in the city and their relative fortunes and misfortunes, and I just wanted to warn you that you are potentially walking into a somewhat sticky situation." Benn looks at her and says, "I believe I already know that, thank you. You see, I was already accosted by a couple of thugs on my way to this very place." She nods and says, "I'm not surprised. You see, the family that you're asking about, their star is on the rise, and my people are watching them and keeping an eye on them, and I just want to make sure that you are careful if you're going to continue pursuing this, because I would hate for you to ruin our operations." I've never heard of a shade offering up information on their operations. How can I be sure that you are who you say you are, and not another agent sent by the merchants in question to get me off the trail? She shrugs a little bit and says, "You can take my word for it, if you like, or you can trust this." And she removes a small coin from her pocket. On one side is the heraldry of the city, a mountain range kind of arcing on two sides with a star or a jewel in the center of it. And on the other side is what looks like a ghostly figure. And as she sets the coin down on the table, it hums ever so slightly, and there's this resonance in the table, in the wood table, that just is like a little bit as she sets the coin down on the table. Ben looks at it, raises an eyebrow, and then looks back at her and says, "All right, I believe you. If you are here to warn me that this may be dangerous, are you also here to help me? It would be beneficial to my investigation if I had some assistance, especially from a shade." She smiles a little bit and says, "My role right now is simply observational. I'm not here to get in your way, but I'm also not here to help you. I'm simply letting you know that there are more eyes on this situation than just your little mercenary company." Ben looks at her and says, "Have we met before?" She again looks at him, and then I think this time she looks a little puzzled, and then she says, "I don't believe so. I don't know why I'd have any cause to meet a mercenary before now." He looks at her and he says, "You look very familiar to me. I cannot quite place it." She looks back at him and shrugs and says, "Maybe I just have one of those faces. It is, after all, a trick of my trade." He says, No, it's not that." And then he has a realization, and he schools his face so that he doesn't betray it. And he says, "Perhaps I was mistaken. I apologize. Is there anything else that you have to say to me? Or is our business concluded?" She looks around and she says, "This is one of the finest breweries in all of Hartvale. People come from all over to drink here, from all different walks of life. There are a lot of ears in places like these. Be careful." She stands, picks up her coin, and turns to go. Ben says, "If you do have any authority to assist me in the future, is there some way for me to find you?" She smiles a little bit and says, "Oh, don't worry. I'll be watching. If I need to talk to you, I'll find you." And she turns and walks out the door. Ben watches her go and then returns to his drink. He is somewhat unsettled by this interaction because the shades are legendary in the city. Not everybody knows about them, but they certainly have a reputation if you know who to talk to. And I think Ben, because of the family that he grew up in and his place in the city before he left for his required service term, and also before he returned and decided to take on a new name and join the Crest, he had some interaction or some knowledge of the Shades. And he knows that they are incredibly dangerous and incredibly focused on the protection of Heartvale. So for one of them to approach him and to have this conversation somewhat in the open means that there is really more going on here than he expected and that he knows. And knowing that there are shades involved in this situation just makes him all the more nervous and cautious that this situation could very quickly spiral out of control and lead to a great deal of bloodshed. I think as he is still sitting there and thinking about this, the back door of the tap room opens and Merrick emerges, and he looks over and goes, my old friend, it's good to see you again. And he comes over and he makes a stop at the bar and grabs 2 more pints of beer and brings them over and sets them down. And he says, I'm so sorry. I've already forgotten. You said it was... And Ben says, Ben Winestone. Oh, that's right. I'm so terribly sorry, my friend. It's been a busy afternoon and it just slipped my mind until I just saw you right now. It's so good to see you, my friend. I've missed you. I'm glad to have you back in the city. How was your time in the Navy? And Ben nods and says, it was illuminating. War is different than I expected it to be. And Merrick grows serious and says, oh, of course. I apologize. If you don't want to talk about it, that's totally understandable. How are you? What are you up to? You said you joined a mercenary company? And Ben kind of raises his hand and says, yes, and that is actually why I came to speak with you. Oh, you were looking for me? Ben nods and says, I was, yes. I am interested in hearing your thoughts on some certain mercantile families and their fortunes and misfortunes. At which point Merrick looks at him with this very shrewd look and says, are you getting into trouble, my old friend? And Ben says, I certainly hope not, but I am interested in what you know about the Vidala. And let's find out what he knows about the Vidala. Does Merrick have any pertinent information about the Vidala family? I think he is a man of business. He has been engaged in the city, and I think that means that it is likely that he has some knowledge of the Vidala and their dealings. So I'm going to roll on the fate chart, and we are going to see what we learn. So I'm going to roll over last episode's chaos factor of 6 as part of that arrive at the brewery scene, as I think it makes sense that we're still effectively in that same scene of him being at the brewery. And so I'm going to roll my 2 die 10, and I'm going to see what the fate chart says. 25, yes. Yes, he knows something interesting. What does he know? Let's go ahead and roll on action and subject, and that'll give us an idea of what information he has that he can share with Ben. 41, expose. It's a good start. And 40, expose exterior factors. Interesting. So that says to me that he knows something about the Vidala family that maybe isn't super common knowledge. And maybe that is that the family is not as successful as they claim, and that they are actually receiving aid from outside of Heartvale. So is this aid coming from Heartvale's enemies? Is it coming from the rival city to Heartvale, Davenar? I think that is very unlikely. So let's ask the fate chart. 36, on very unlikely is actually a yes. So, yes, the aid that they're receiving is coming from Davenar. So I think what Merrick says is, well, I've heard some rumors, and I have friends all over the place. You know, I have plenty of friends. And I did a little bit of asking around, and it seems as though it's possible that the Vidala family has holdings in a few other cities along the coast, including Davenar. And Benn sort of leans forward and says, "Oh, really? That's fascinating. They've made a show of claiming to be born and raised in Heartvale and Heartvale proud, and yet they are receiving income from other places." Yes, I think that is true, and I think it's quite possible that they're receiving payment from other cities as well to do their business both in Heartvale and outside of it. Especially if it's Davenar, you know that the trade restrictions are quite strong at the moment as a result of the aftermath of the war. So it is quite possible that they are some sort of front for Davenar in trade. But of course, these are all rumors. I don't know any of this for certain. And Benn, I think, listens to that, hears that, and he says, "It would make a certain amount of sense, I think. I appreciate your insight on this, Merrick. I would hope that we can keep this between us." "Of course, my friend, I would be happy to. Like I said, I don't know it for certain, and it is only things that I have heard, and I don't know any of these Vidala myself, so I can't speak to their character, but perhaps if you are bent on looking into this, that is something to investigate." Benn nods and says, "Yes, I think it is. Merrick, how have you been?" And he sort of deftly turns the conversation away from the Vidala family and is basically going to spend some time catching up with his old friend. And I think that's a great place to end this scene. I think that mostly kept things under control, so Chaos Factor is going to go down to 5 as we go into the next scene. I think Benn spends the rest of the evening talking to Merrick and sort of catching up with him, and he is going to leave sort of after dusk, and he's going to head out. And I think right before he heads out, he's going to ask Merrick about the Vidala shop. And Merrick is able to give him directions. And once again, Benn reiterates that this conversation should remain between them. And he is going to wish Merrick well and head out into the night. So the next scene is going to be break into the Vidala shop. And the chaos factor is going to be 5. And we're going to go ahead and roll our d10 and see how this scene setup plays out. Got a 7, which is above our chaos rank. So the scene is going to play out as expected. Benn leaves the brewery and heads out onto the dark streets of Heartvale. There are lanterns along the roadway, and they illuminate some of the path, but it is a very different feel to the city at night. There is very little bustle of activity as he is walking towards the red steps. There are still people out and about, and in this part of Heartvale, for the most part, they are on their way home from the tap houses. They are headed home from their shops. For the most part, they are people who are not looking to cause any trouble. But in a city as large as Heartvale, there will always be those who are on the streets, who are looking to do ill to others. Benn used to fear walking the streets at night when he was young, before he left to fight in the war, before he returned and became a Crest mercenary. Now he does not fear these streets. He walks with purpose and with alertness as he makes his way towards the Vidala shop on the red steps. The shop is dark when he arrives. He watches for a while to make sure that there is no traffic inside the shop, that no one is still there. The Vidala are not the most powerful merchant family in the town, so it is quite possible that there are some members of the family who work the shop. And so Benn waits and watches to make sure that they are not still there. After a bell or two passes, Benn, satisfied that there is little going on inside, is going to make his way towards the door and is going to attempt to pick the lock and make his way in. So we are going to go ahead and, in this case, face duress. So Benn has the tools that he needs. He has the tools of the trade. He is going to attempt to face duress to open the lock and make his way into the Vidala shop. So when you do something difficult where your ability to do so is seriously in question, roll plus steady. I don't know that his ability is seriously in question, but I think this will answer for us whether or not there are things that he missed in his approach to this mission. So we're going to roll 2d6 plus steady, and Benn's steady is 2. 9 plus 2 is 11. That is a full success, so that is going to be, you have achieved what you set out to do. So Benn picks the lock and opens it quietly. He slips inside and closes the door behind him. Now, this shop is nicely sized. It's not the largest shop on the red steps, but it's also not the smallest shop. And he makes his way through carefully, picking his way around the counter and the various displays of goods that are kept inside this room. He makes his way towards the back, where there's a staircase that leads upstairs. Like many of these shops in the red steps, there are multiple floors. There's usually the main floor where the business is done. There's a basement where oftentimes goods are kept and stored. And there's usually a second story where the books are kept and where the behind the scenes business is done. So Benn takes a moment and begins to creep his way up the steps, and he makes his way towards the second floor. And I think at this point, he is going to pull out a small lantern, and he is going to light it so that he has a small amount of light. And it's a hooded lantern, and so he is able to direct some of the light and keep it from shining throughout the whole room. He makes his way carefully up the stairs and enters the main office of this business. And at this point, he is going to look around and see what information he can glean. So we're going to study a situation here. When things are getting charged or tense and you try to work out what is happening around you, roll plus sly. So Benn's sly is 1, and this is the first time that he is rolling that in this scene, which is one of his highlighted stats. So I'm going to go ahead and mark an advancement point for that. I will also note that I reached 5 advancement points during last episode. I didn't make a note of it then, but I went ahead and took the advancement and added 1 to my Wily stat, which took Benn from 0 to 1 on that. So we now have 1 advancement point on our track towards 5, and I am going to go ahead and roll my 2d6 plus my 1 sly to study a situation here. Ooh, 2 6s. That's awesome. So that's 12 plus 1 is 13. That is going to garner me 3 questions. So I think the first question is going to be, how is one of my adversaries vulnerable to me right now? And I think this is answered by Benn going over to the desk that is tucked in the corner of this place. And he's going to start searching through it. And I think as he's looking down, he finds a ledger. And he pulls out the ledger and opens it up, and it looks like a very standard business ledger with all of these transactions listed. And he quickly scans through it, and there doesn't seem to be anything out of place here. So he continues to look around, and I think he finds a small compartment that is hidden at the bottom of the desk, and he opens it up and removes an identical ledger to the first one, but this one has what look like coded transactions in it, and he's going to remove it. And I think, to be fair on this, that's probably an answer to a different question, which is, what am I missing? Which is that there's a secret compartment in the desk. And the second question then will be, how is one of my adversaries vulnerable to me right now? And I think that he opens up the ledger and he's reading through it. He is able to discern enough that these coded transactions represent business dealings outside of Heartvale. And so he is going to leaf through it a little bit and get an idea of what's going on in there. So that's 2 questions that have been answered. The third one is, who or what here could be a useful opportunity for me? And I think that Benn, looking around, let's go ahead and ask the fate chart. Do action and subject to see what might be a useful opportunity here. So we got 40, which is postpone, and 75, military. Postpone, military. Okay, interesting. So how is that useful to Benn in this? So I think as he is looking through the ledger, he sees a couple of payments to the Vixilio War College, and he follows those items around, and it looks as though there were several payments made to the Vixilio War College before the Andanya set sail and after it returned as a quote-unquote ghost ship. And I think Benn, looking at this and then starting to rifle through the papers on the rest of the desk, is able to find enough information and is able to put together that the shipment that the Andanya was hired to transport was actually supposed to go out on a military ship, but the Vidala family paid off someone at the War College to move things around so that ship was no longer able to carry it. They hired the Andanya to transport it. And I think the important note to that is that the military ships oftentimes have a resident mage on board. And it's very possible that if a mage had been present when whatever that artifact was that the Andanya brought back, they would have sensed it and been able to stop it. And so this payment basically ensured that the Andanya, which doesn't have a mage on board, was going to be the ship that transported this shipment back from the other port. Now, why would the Vidala go to the effort of paying off the Vexillio War College when they were the ones who initiated this transport? And I think because the initial shipment was some sort of military supplies that were going out, and that usually is transported aboard a military ship. But because the War College was paid off and the other ship that was supposed to do it got transferred to a different duty, the Vidala, probably as part of that payment, got the transport rights changed to the Andanya, a drift ship, which normally wouldn't happen. But because they didn't have a mage on board, that helped the Vidala with this return journey with this artifact that was going to unleash this horror on the crew. So they were able to take these funds and pay off the Vexillio War College. And there's a notation in there about who it went to. And I think it's in code. So I'm going to just roll a d6 here. And then I'm going to take an initial from that d6. All right, a 6. W. So the payment went to Admiral W at the Vexillio War College. And that payment facilitated this change of shipment. So Benn has garnered this information. I think he's going to take a few moments and write some notes to himself about these coded transactions in this false ledger, because I think he doesn't want them to know that he's been inside, that he's seen this. Because I think he's realizing that, like, if they're paying off the Vexillio War College to do stuff, then this goes much farther than what he originally anticipated. And so he doesn't want to alert anyone that he's gotten this close. So he is going to take a few notes and mark this stuff down. And I think that is, in this case, going to be another face duress. And this is going to be more of a to see how much information he's able to copy down, and if anything happens to interrupt him. So this is going to be face duress plus steady, and it's going to be +2. 6 + 2 is 8, which is a partial success. So on a 7 to 9, you have flinched, stalled, or hesitated. The MC will pick 1 or 2 of the following and tell you what it will look like if you take it. So you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You can achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but you can do something similar instead. All right, so I think I'm going to go with you can achieve your goal, but only partially. And I think what that means is he is scribbling down as much of this information as he is able to, but he knows that the longer he stays here, the more likely he is to be discovered. And he doesn't want to alert them that someone has been inside the shop. So he is going to scribble as quickly as possible for a few moments, and then he is going to tuck away that paper into his pocket, and then he is going to sneak out of the shop. And I think as he does so, let's go ahead and ask the fate chart, does anyone notice him as he is slipping out of this shop? So I'm going to say there's no way that somebody sees him, because he has made a lot of his like sneaky rolls that he needed to, and he is able to slip out relatively undetected. So let's ask the fate chart. Chaos rank of 5. Got a 58, which is a no. No, he is not seen on his way out. So he is able to slip away into the night undetected. And that's a great place to end that scene. And once again, our chaos factor is actually going to go... I'm going to actually say it goes up this time, back up to 6. Because even though the actions of what happened went well, I think that Benn is starting to get a sense that there is a much bigger mess of webs and confusion going on here. And it is probably going to get more dangerous from here on out. He is going to return back to his room. And I don't think we need to make that a scene. Because I rolled that he was not seen on his way out, I don't think that there's anything like a random encounter with thugs or anything like that that makes sense for this. So he makes it back to his little apartment, gets a little bit of sleep. He probably makes some notes to himself about what he saw the day before and the night before. And I think he is smart enough to record some of this information in code and hide it in his apartment. And then he is going to head out the following morning. And I think he's going to follow up on this lead of Admiral W. And so he is going to head to the War College to see if he can gain any information on that. We're going to say the scene setup for the next scene is going to be investigate the War College and find out the identity of Admiral W. And for this, we're going to roll our D10 to see how our chaos factor stacks up. And let's see what happens. I rolled a 7. So once again, we are above our chaos rank. So the scene will play out as expected. So Benn makes his way down the streets of Heartvale, out of his apartment, and towards the Howl. Now, the Howl is the wealthy district of Heartvale, and the proper name for it is called Wolf Song. But many people call it the Howl because there is a wall built around the Howl that separates the district from the rest of Heartvale. That was the sort of original wall, or at least the footprint of the original wall that surrounded the original Heartvale. And there are these chimes that hang on the top of the wall. And occasionally, when the wind is just right, they whistle through these chimes, and it sounds as though there are wolves howling in the wind. One of the patron deities of Heartvale is Lupercas, the wolf god, an ancient hunter that is said to have brought the first settlers of Heartvale to this place to keep them safe from the predators that were hunting them. And so these chimes and their wolf song are a way to honor Lupercas. So Benn makes his way through the streets, and he passes a couple of those Kingsword criers who are calling out the news of the day. And one of the things that they are talking about is the ghost ship Andanya has been purged by the Crest mercenaries, and that those surviving crew are resting and recovering. There is also a bit about some city watch being murdered in the grasp by miscreants in the night. As Benn passes by, he reaches the gate to Wolfsong, and unlike most of the districts here, there are guards standing at the gate. And as he approaches, one of the guards raises a hand and says, "What's your business, sir?" And Benn says, I am on my way to the Vixilio War College. The guards give him a look up and down, and they say, you don't look like you're the sort that would be visiting the War College. Benn looks around and says, I am a citizen of Hartvale. Do I not have the right to go and take my examination for entrance into the War College? The guards look at each other, and one of them, the one that hasn't spoken yet, shrugs a little bit. And the one that has spoken turns back and says, it is your right, yeah, but it's also my right to keep out any riffraff. Now, maybe we can come to some sort of arrangement. And he kind of gives Benn a very knowing look. And I think Benn is going to say, we could do that, or you could stand aside, as it is my right as a citizen of Hartvale to be able to pass through these gates and visit the War College. Or do I need to take this up with Watch Commander Bloodborne? And he is going to attempt to persuade with leverage. So when you try to convince someone to do or say something for you, using something you have against them or offering to give them what they want, roll plus Wily. So this is going to be +1 because I just increased my Wily. It's going to be 11 plus 1 is a 12, which is a complete success. So they accept your offer and do or say what you want. So the two guards look at each other. The one who hasn't spoken yet kind of just shakes his head a little bit. And the other says, right, get on with it, and steps aside. Benn enters Wolfsong. And as he walks the streets, he is reminded of a time several years ago when he walked these streets before he left for his service in the Navy. He often made the walk to the War College to look at the monuments to the great captains of old, to Vixilio, greatest and most formidable of the Hartvale captains. He would often think about and dream about becoming a famous captain himself and having a statue of his own in that courtyard. 3 years of war changed that perspective, changed that desire. He discovered a lot during the war with Davenar, and perhaps the most important thing he discovered is that he did not want to serve the city in that way, that the politics that he witnessed as a lowly sailor in the Hartvale Navy, watching the captains of the ships prance around, talking about their scores and the ways that they were going to add to Vixilio's text, when really they were just getting their sailors killed. Now Benn enters the War College's grounds, and he stands in that courtyard once again. And as he looks around, he sees those statues, and again, prominent among them is Vixilio, the first and greatest naval captain of Hartvale. An imposing figure with aquiline features and a sword in his hand and a book in the other, standing proudly, looking out towards the horizon. Benn wonders if the real Vixilio was anything like his legend. He walks past the statues and enters through the main doors. There are others here, a bustle of those who have finished their 3-year term and have come to apply to the War College in hopes of becoming officers themselves. Benn, in another life, might have been amongst them, but now he comes here as a crest, as a mercenary that these others will look down on if they know who he is. or what he is. He enters and he approaches the main desk where there are a number of people gathering these applications and passing them out. There are some exclamations amongst some of the sailors gathered when they realize that it's not an oral exam, that it is in fact a written exam. And Benn watches as a few of those sailors toss the papers on the ground and walk out. Now, does Benn recognize any of the attendants sitting behind the desk? And I think it is 50-50. So we're sitting at a chaos rank of 6, 50-50. Here we go. 12. 12 is a exceptional yes. So yes, he does recognize someone behind the desk. And in fact, it is very much someone that he recognizes. And I think with that exceptional yes, I know exactly who this person is. So he walks in, he looks around, he sees these happenings going on. He looks over at the desk and he sees a red-haired young woman shuffling a bunch of papers. He approaches her, and as she looks up, she sees him, and there is almost a flicker of annoyance that crosses her eyes as she sees him, but it quickly disappears behind a mask and a smile as she says, "Can I help you?" And Benn says, "Well, I didn't imagine finding you here." She looks around, although there is plenty of bustle and none of her other associates have noticed this conversation as they're having interactions with other students on their own. And she says, "What are you doing here?" And kind of keeping that false smile on her face. Benn says, "I thought you would be harder to find. I did not expect to find you here, of all places." That smile fades just a little bit, and she says, with a little more steel in her voice, "What are you doing here?" Benn says, "Well, I'm here to find someone. Someone other than yourself, of course. I'm looking for an admiral." And she narrows her eyes and looks at him and says, "Is this about what we discussed yesterday?" This time it's Benn's turn to smile. And he says, "Well, it could be, but unless we are allies working together on this, I don't know that I can share my information with you." She looks at him very sternly and says, "You're the one that came here for information. If you want information on the admirals, then maybe we should talk." Benn nods and says, "I agree. Perhaps we could take a brief walk and step away from these other ears." She looks at him, sighs, and then turns and says something to one of the other associates. They nod and sort of look a little annoyed, but she steps away and Benn walks with her. They reach an antechamber off of the main entryway, and they are alone. At which point Benn turns to her and says, "I have discovered some information that has led me to the War College, and I wonder if you know an admiral whose name begins with a W." The young woman pales ever so slightly, and she says, "I do." Benn says, "Would you mind terribly telling me his name? His full name? Because I believe he's under the influence of the Vidala family." She looks at him, looks back towards the entryway, and she just says, "Ah, sleeper's mercy. This is gonna get bad." Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thanks so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really does help others find me. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @ErrantSoloPod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.